Katie from Nerd Church here. Um, I am here to give a brief rundown of again, this is the view from outer space about the Magisterium of the Catholic Church, how it functions, and what it means in people's lives. Basically, the Magisterium of the Catholic Church is an extremely funky and fancy and Latin-y way of saying the collected knowledge and interpretation of the Catholic Church, which is understood to be an ongoing project that began in the year 33, approximately, and has continued until now, and will not be completed in 2023, probably, but is nonetheless necessary. So, now, I will be the first to admit there is a bad version of this. And the bad version of this is when someone has been told that basically trickle-down economics and obsession with a very narrow band of social issues, all of which are being best accomplished by shaming young girls for having uteruses, because we all know that they are going to grow up and commit a whole bunch of sins involving their uteruses. And that this has been unchanging forever, because that's the kind of faith that crashes out as soon as, well, frankly, the kid encounters church history. The thing is, the kid is going to encounter church history in the Catholic Church. So that gives people a way, because when it works well, and it works well more often than it works badly, what the idea of the magisterium does is give kids an idea that the church has history, that the development of religion and finding out about God is an ongoing project, but that it's a project that began a very long time ago and is continuing. And it's that sense of history that is really important to communicate. A really good way to think about it is if you've ever, say, read the Easy Rawlins novels, which you should. You will learn, they're very good detective novels. You will also learn a tremendous amount about what it was like to be a black man in America in mid-19th century Los Angeles. Or, for our Canadian friends, if you read L.M. Montgomery, and you find out about this kind of, very idealized version of Canada, that's happening on Prince Edward Island. It's that kind of a thing, but that's how we're encouraged to read Bible stories. We're encouraged to read them essentially as historical fiction. It happened a long time ago. It happened very far away. And it takes an act of reaching out and an act of imagination, just a little bit. Because it's a family story, but Catholics are told that we're adopted. So we have to learn about a culture that's not our own in order to understand our own culture better. So what does this look like in practice? Okay, I'm going to pick a really easy example. I'm, reading through Deuteronomy, and I notice that it kind of says not to eat pork. And I have questions about this now. So, basically, I'm going to go to my priest. This would be I have two options, right? One, I can go to my priest. And keep in mind, when I'm saying I'm going to my priest, I mean that I'm going to talk to, one of three people. All of whom have master's degrees in topics, at least, in topics relating to theology and church law, right? These are trained professionals. So I go to them and I say, well, I have a question about Deuteronomy. And they say, okay, remember, the magisterium of the church, scripture is the first level, right? If scripture is unclear, and scripture is unclear because we've got the vision of Peter. Peter says, don't call any human unclean, but also, by the way, seriously, have you tasted shrimp? Because, okay, like, maybe we can loosen up on the shrimp thing, right? So I'm going to get told, okay, so scripture is unclear. So you go to the church fathers. Well, you can see that the practice of the early church was kind of messy. And, but you can also see that by, maybe like the second or third century, that Christians were pretty much just eating pork and it wasn't considered a problem. So, therefore, they will point out that, ever since that point, the general consensus has been that Catholics can eat pork. And so I'm fine to eat pork. And at that point, if I don't say, yeah, that sounds legit. Now, I'm not obligated to eat pork, right? But if I'm choosing to eat pork because I understand that that particular commandment is not binding on me, I'm fine. However, if I choose not to eat pork because I don't like pork, that's fine. If I choose not to eat pork because I believe that my priest is an idiot and the church is wrong and the Pope is dumb and Peter's vision was made up and, and Christians should be keeping kosher, well, at that point, I am a heretic and I'm in schism with the Catholic Church, and that would be a problem. So I'm not going to want to do that. But the point is that it all comes from this idea that you can go back to the texts and apply them to your life. But you have to start with the understanding that this is history. And it's that sense of it's the fact that historiography gets baked into the cake. Imperfectly and not always well, but it gets baked into the cake. And that means that, again, I cannot say this enough. The fact that original sin isn't in the Bible is not something that is going to cause a Catholic to lose their faith, if they've been taught about church history and the magisterium properly. Being told that original sin isn't in the Bible is going to be taken as an opportunity for somebody to tell you exactly how smart and based St. Augustine was. And that goes from anywhere from some rando with a, sub 100 YouTube channel who, frankly kind of gets annoyed at Augustine sometimes, and, the Pope who considers St. Augustine to be one of his besties. So that's all I got. Nerd Church out.